Hi, I'm Thomas Graves, and welcome to the Black Mold of Grief. My mom's name was Margaret, but she went by Peg, and she was born in 1935. She was the third of four kids, and they were all born and raised in Pittsburgh, and that's where most of her family still lives. And she had a kidney disease called nephritis from when she was very young. And the doctors told her family that if she lived past her teenage years, they should consider themselves lucky. And she had two very serious bouts with it, one when she was in third grade and one when she was 16. And she basically stayed home the full school years, both of those times, and just had to do homework at home and live basically in bed the whole time. But she did survive out of her teenage years, went to Penn State, graduated, and then met my dad on a blind date, and they got married, had five kids. They had three girls and then two boys, and I am the youngest of the five. She came from a very big, extended, close-knit Catholic family. Her dad, Walt, when he bought his house for his family, he actually bought the vacant lot next door. And then when his sister, Peg, got married, he sold the lot next door to her and her husband for $1. And they ended up fencing in both yards as one big yard. So it was kind of like a family compound. And so with my mom and her three siblings, and then next door they had six kids. So even though they were cousins, it was basically 10 siblings growing up together in this big yard. And as my mom's generation grew up, got married, had kids, by the time I came along, anytime there was a family gathering, the number was probably 50 or more, close-knit family every Sunday after Mass, Easter, Christmas, Father's Day, Mother's Day, birthdays. And so it was just one big, big family. But after my mom passed, we separated from them. And I not only lost my mom when I was 2, but I lost all 50 of those family members by the time I was 3. And I have no memory of my mom because I was 2, and I actually had no memory of those 50 family members. And I rediscovered them when I was in 2005 and realized that the loss of those 50 is what really fueled my depression. But because I had no memory of them, I never knew why. I just had this big hole, and that was the cause of my ongoing depression. But when we did connect with them, and I did start piecing all that together, and we were able to talk to my aunts and uncles and get some more stories about my mom, we really kind of got a sense of who she was, and that definitely helped me understand who she was and how she approached life. And my one sister, Catherine, asked my aunts and uncles, if you could tell one story about our mom that would tell us who our mom was, what would that story be? And my aunts and uncles all just instantly laughed and said, yeah, there's one story. And so her younger sister, Catherine, went by the name Candle because when Candle came home from the hospital after she was born, my Uncle Vic tried to say Catherine, but he couldn't, and he said Candle instead, and so that was just her name. So she's Candle. But after Candle graduated from college, she bought a new car, and it was her pride and joy. Nobody was allowed to drive it, any of that, and so everybody knew that. But apparently my mom could kind of charm her way into getting things that she wanted, and she wanted to borrow Candle's car. So Candle initially refused, but my mom kind of wore her down. And so Candle put all these stipulations that, you got to be careful, blah, 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 blah. So off my mom went to this party, and a couple hours later, the phone started ringing at home, and everybody started asking about Candle and was she okay? And they were wondering, well, why are people calling? And they said, well, because Candle's car is on the side of the road, abandoned. And so they thought something happened to my mom. So they go out looking for her. I can't find her. So they're all worried. And so they finally give up looking for her. So they go back home so they can wait for her. And a little while later, my mom comes home, surprised that everybody's up waiting on her. And so they said, well, why? What are you doing? And they said, well, everybody called saying that, the car was abandoned. And my mom said, oh, yeah, well, it ran out of gas. And so I was only 2 blocks from the party. So I locked it up and walked to the party. And so Candle got upset with her and said, well, it could have been stolen. And my mom said, well, I thought about that, but people who steal are lazy. And so anybody who wanted to steal the car would have to go back home, get an empty gas can, then go to the gas station, fill it up, and then come get the car, break into the car, fill it up with gas, and then drive it home. And that's just a lot of work for a lazy person. So nobody was going to steal it. And that was just how she thought. And she knew that she was going to have a shorter life. So she always believed in living and going to the party. And in that moment, I realized the difference between how I approached life and how she approached life. And for me, had I been in that same situation, I would have taken that as a sign that I shouldn't go to the party, and I should be more responsible. And I just would have turned that into a negative, and she just took it as a positive and just kept going. And so that helped me shift my goals and perspective. And it still took a little bit to undo that mindset, but it gave me a different mindset to move towards. And then prior to that, really the only thing that I knew about my first mom was from a conversation that I had with my second mom when I was 16. I came home from high school and my mom said, come into the living room. I want to talk to you. And so when I went in there, my mom had set up a whole bunch of pictures and stuff all over. And so I sat down and it was all pictures of my first mom and a lot of her things. And it was actually the first time I knew what my mom looked like. I'd never seen a picture of her. And so it was really probably my favorite memory of my second mom because it was the first time I ever saw her truly vulnerable. I could tell she was scared that I would not love her as much if I knew a lot about my first mom, and that she was putting that fear aside to share with me things that she felt I needed to know. And the fact that she was being that vulnerable really made me love her more. So after with the pictures, then she started sharing what stories she knew, because my dad, I don't think, was ever comfortable talking about her because I think he felt like, she had adopted the 5 of us and he didn't feel like maybe he should share that much and talk about my first mom. So I think she took it upon herself to do that because she felt like we should know. So she shared my mom's poetry. She wrote a lot of poetry. The other thing my mom shared with me is about the nephritis, and when she was 16 and had the serious bout with nephritis. At that point, she prayed to Saint Teresa that if she survived, she would have as many kids as God wanted her to have. And so, again, as she married my dad, they started having kids. She kept that promise. And so my first older 4 siblings were 1 year apart, one right after the other. And each pregnancy did take a toll on her body. And to the point that after my older brother Chuck was born, she just couldn't get pregnant that year. Her body just needed a year off. And in that year, or 2 years, her family was worried about her and was trying to convince her to go back on her promise, because God would understand. So they went to the doctors and had them to try to convince her that maybe she shouldn't. And her response was, I made a commitment, I'm going to keep it. So they went to the priest and said, can you talk to her and tell her that God would understand? And he tried, and she said no. And so then they went to the bishop and tried, and her response was no, I made a commitment, I'm going to keep it. And so my mom shared that with me because she wanted me to know how much my mom loved me and how much she wanted me to be here. And my mom worked for the gas company after college, and she actually wrote recipes for the gas bill. So when people would open their gas bill, there'd be a recipe card in there. And so she was responsible for coming up with those recipes and sending those out. But the really cool thing was she had submitted something to Red Book magazine. They were doing kind of a contest, and they were going to take all the submissions into a little collection of vignettes. And the title and the theme was When I First Felt Truly Married. And so her submission was part of that collection. And so it was really a pretty cool submission. And I read it, and then my mom gathered everything up and kind of boxed it all back up together. And my sister Patty has everything now. But when I was in college, I went to the library, and I knew that it was published in 1963 after my third sister was born, because those are the three kids that she mentioned in the little vignette. And so I found it and printed it off, and I would read it from time to time. And I must have read it probably a dozen times or more before I realized at the end of the article there was this little bitty symbol that magazines put at the end of an article to say that the article was over. And I realized that they closed it with her article. So they thought hers was the best. And it was pretty cool to realize that they had picked hers to close that article. So, but after college, all of the pain that we had all been locking in what I now call black mold had really started to take hold and spread and cause a lot of problems. And so we were fighting with each other or living with the tension of trying not to fight. And so I would take that out from time to time and read it. And early on, I would read it and just be inspired, because I, at that point, was starting to write songs, and I would kind of connect with it for that. But as the family started to struggle more and more, it would highlight for me that we were drifting further and further away from what she was describing in that article. And one day after a family fight, I realized that if I died in that moment and went to heaven and met her for the first time, and I started telling her about my life since I had seen her last, that I would basically just be complaining that since she passed, the pain of that just created decisions that created more pain, that created decisions that created more pain, and that it had just rippled and rippled and rippled, and that her death had basically just ruined my life. And in that moment, I realized that is not the conversation I want to have. That is not the conversation she deserves. And so I made a decision in that moment. I am going to heal so that I can have a different first conversation in heaven. And I didn't know how I was going to heal. I didn't know how to heal. I didn't know how long it was going to take. But I knew I was going to heal so that I could have a conversation with her that would bring her joy, so that when I sat down and said, here's what I've done, here's the life I lived, I didn't get to share it with you when I lived it, but I want to share it with you now, that when I started to share that, it would bring her joy. My goal became to heal all the black mold inside of me so that I could live in a way that I could talk about my life and have a conversation in heaven that would bring my mom joy. And since I was writing and I was trying to continue that writing bug that I'd gotten from my mom, I took that goal and turned it into a song so that I could use it as inspiration for myself on the bad days. And it became the song, I Want to Bring You Joy. What I find most interesting about Ethan is that if you listen to it, you would never guess that he was from New Zealand. He sounds like he is R&B as R&B can get. And he has a little bit of a nasal quality, and his runs are phenomenal. And I actually found him doing a JoJo cover. And again, you wouldn't guess that he was from New Zealand. And so I paired him with a producer who did this fantastic track. And it's just a very soothing, comfortable version that doesn't have a lot of intensity to it. And it's just a nice, relaxing version of the song that just puts me at ease.
If I don't make a change, I'll meet you in the clouds, and this emptiness will be all I talk about. You would understand, but I'd be ashamed if you brought your smile and I brought my pain to our first conversation in heaven. I wanna bring you joy, and I wanna bring you joy. 'Cause I don't care how tough it is, I am gonna live. 'Cause I wanna bring you joy.
Thank you for tuning into the Black Mold of Grief. In next week's episode, I'm going to share the story of my second mom who adopted and raised me. But in the meantime, I hope something I've said helps you bring a little more joy to your first conversation in heaven, and I hope to see you next time.